So today's video is going to be my top 10 favorite neutral palettes in my collection. I've been wanting to do this video for so long and I am finally filming it for you guys. I've had this idea in my head for a long time. You guys know how much of a neutral lover I can be. I love neutral eyeshadow palettes, and I have 10 to share with you guys from a few different brands, and I'm very excited to share these with you guys. Some of them were actually more surprising than others. I knew my top 3 automatically, what my favorite ones are in my collection, but there were a couple of other ones that I didn't think I would put in this list, and it actually surprised me that they're actually in this ranking, because I love them just as much as I love my other palettes in this video. So I'm very excited to share these picks with you guys. So number 10 is going to be actually the eyeshadow palette I have on my eyes today. I really do love this palette. Just because it's ranked number 10 doesn't mean I don't love it. I love the formula. I love everything about it. So number 10 is the Nabla Side by Side Nude palette. Now, this is my first and only Nabla palette in my collection. I was wanting to try the brand for so long that I finally just decided to pick up this palette. They haven't really released too much new products since they came out with this. They're not really releasing too many eyeshadow palettes, but this is a really beautiful neutral slash warm slash cool tone palette. And the reason why this is such a good neutral palette is because you pretty much have everything you could possibly need as a neutral lover in this palette. You have your cool tone side, and then you have your more warm toned side. Then you have this column of beautiful, sparkly, very metallic, wet looking shimmers, and then you have 2 topper shades, and then you have these like really dark gray tones in here. You have like these cooler tone neutrals here, and then you have your warm tones here, and you have the perfect brow bone highlight called Rarity. I use this on my brow bone every single time I use this palette. The only reason why this palette is ranking a bit lower than the rest of the palettes I'm going to be sharing is because even though I absolutely adore the formula, the mattes in here are super buttery and the shimmers are stunning on the lid. The only reason why I would say that this is a little bit lower is because I'm not too crazy about the topper shades in here. I don't really use topper shades. I just use a straight up metallic on my lid. And if it's pigmented for me, it's pigmented and that's it. Like, I don't really go over my lid with a topper shade. So what I'm wearing for my look today is that I'm using the shade Bonjour in my crease. Then I used the shade Burnt Sienna to define my crease. And then I used the shade Tempera on my outer corners. And then for the lid, I was going to use a different shimmer. I tried to stray away from the golds, but I couldn't help myself. This is such a stunning gold, yellow gold on the lid. So I put the shade Paradiso all over my lid, and it's just so stunning. And then I used the shade Rarity on my brow bone. And then for the inner corners, I used the shade Ray of Light. And that's my eye look today. Very simple, neutral eyeshadow look. And I know that I just know every time I use any of these palettes, I know my look is going to be beautiful. But again, the topper shades, I'm not too crazy about in here. I know I have other like palettes from other brands like Natasha Denona. I didn't include Natasha Denona in this video. They're wonderful palettes, but I'm really just including palettes that are neutral tone that I reach for all the time. Natasha Denona, I wouldn't really consider neutral for the palettes that I do have. The only one that is the gold palette. And I love that palette, but that's more so like a special occasion palette for me. These are really like palettes that I reach for everyday looks on an everyday basis, and those are the palettes that I wanted to share today. That's still a stunning palette, but it's hella expensive, so I'm kind of just talking about palettes that are affordable to mid-range to a little bit more pricey. So I love this palette so much. I can't rave about it enough. I love the black shade in here. It's one of the blackest blacks I've ever used. And I love the neutral tones in here. They blend out beautifully. The matte formula is super easy to use and beginner friendly. I would say that this is a great beginner friendly palette if you've never used like a bigger eyeshadow palette before. It's not too overwhelming. This is probably the biggest palette that I'm going to talk about. The other two, there's two other 16 pan palettes in this video. But as far as a neutral palette, you have everything you could possibly need in here. So that's why I knew I had to include this one. So this one is number 10. Let me stop rambling. Okay, so number 9. This is one of my all-time favorite palettes ever, but it's also my all-time favorite palette from this brand and one of my favorite neutral palettes. So number 10 is the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette, and the reason why this one is ranked a little bit lower is just because I don't really reach for it that much anymore. I didn't really use it last fall. I'm gonna make it my business to use it this fall, because again, I really have been doing a good job of rotating my eyeshadows in my collection, but I don't know, something about it makes me not want to use it all the time. But when I do use this palette, I love my look every single time I use it. This is just the absolute perfect honey toned palette for me. Some of the neutral shades can look a bit similar on the eye, so just be aware of that. But for me, it doesn't really bother me, because for me, when I use a neutral palette, I know there's not going to be that much variation in the looks that I do. And if they all pretty much look very similar to me every time I use it, it doesn't bother me, because I know that I'm going to love my look, because I love neutral looks and I love wearing them on days where I just want to be lazy and I don't want to think about my look. These are the palettes that I reach for. This palette is so wonderful. I love that you get these like more like greenish, goldish kind of shimmers. So they're just beautiful. This golden shade is such a gorgeous gold. And I love that it's not really that too much of a yellow tone gold. It really is like a golden shade where it's not too yellow, but it's also not a cool tone yellow. I can't explain it. It's such a stunning gold. And then we have this like lime green color, which is stunning. And then we have this like more neutral shimmer. And then amber is a really gorgeous like antique gold. And then I really like the matte selection in this palette. This, of course, is a great brow bone highlight for me. And then these are really nice in the crease. I use these interchangeably. And this shade too. And then you have the shade Sting, which is a really beautiful deepening shade. And then Drip is a really nice crease shade as well. So overall, I think that this is the best palette that Urban Decay has done for, and the reason why it is because this is the best naked palette that they've done for a long time. The other naked palettes after this came out, even after this collection, was just so weird, and I don't know why they keep on running with the naked theme. Like, I feel like it's been done way too much at this point, that people are getting really sick of it. But this is really pretty. I mean, it probably still sells really well. This is not a bashing about the naked palettes. It's just to say that I do love this palette. So this one is number 9. I can always count on my look, and I love the honey tones in here. It's just wonderful. So that one is number 9. And the reason why this is the only Urban Decay palette in here, I mean, I do have the naked palettes, but I don't really use the first 3 anymore. The Naked 3 was my favorite neutral palette for a long time, but obviously this has replaced it because this one is a little bit newer to my collection. And yeah, my eyeshadow taste has changed over the years, and I prefer something a little bit more pigmented when it comes to the naked palettes like that one. I did pick up the Wild West palette, like I think like around 2020 was when that came out, or maybe that was last year. And I loved the color story of it, and I really liked it when I got it, but I just thought it was so hard to work with. Like, it was not as easy to use as the Honey palette. I did not like the formula as much in that palette, so it is what it is. Okay, number 8 is probably the most expensive palette I'm going to be talking about, but I absolutely love this palette. I also have the Mary Jane palette from Melt, but this is my all-time favorite Melt palette and also my favorite neutral palette from them. I didn't include the Mary Jane because I wouldn't say that would be a palette I like use all the time. But I have used that a couple of times this year. I haven't really used this one, but this is my favorite neutral palette to use in the fall time. And number 8 is the Melt Cosmetics Rust palette. This palette is just, the mattes in here are so amazing. They're just, Melt mattes are just so pigmented, but they're just so buttery smooth. And I absolutely love the packaging of this. And then this is what the Rust palette looks like. It is such a beautiful palette, you guys. I love like the antique-y warm tone neutral shades in here. You guys know how much of a neutral warm tone lover that I am. These are like my kind of shades. This mustardy yellow is so stunning. It's one of the most pigmented yellows that I own. It's just phenomenal. This shade, Classic, is a really bomb brow bone highlight for me. You would think it would almost be too dark for me because it's like a yellow toned matte brow bone highlight, but which are usually don't work for me because they end up being too dark. But there's something about this one that even though it's a bit darker than some of my other matte brow bone highlights, it's perfect and it just brightens up the brow bone so beautifully. And then you have these deeper warm tones like this chocolatey brown, this deeper chocolate brown, and then this really deep dark brown. These can really deepen up your look beautifully, and I love that they have these two shades in here. And then the matte shades are just so beautiful with the coinciding shimmers that I just love my look every single time I use this. Like I use tarnish with like this mustardy tone color and like one of these shades, and it looks so pretty. And then this one I usually use with these two colors or this color. And then this one I like using with like the deeper mattes. And it's just so pretty. I mean, it's kind of limiting with only having 3 shimmers in here, but I find that it's the perfect amount. I don't feel overwhelmed when I use this palette with choices. I just know that my look is going to be beautiful when I use it. So that's why this one, oh, I just knocked one of the eyeshadows. Some of the pigment came out a little. I'll just clean that up later. It's not really a big deal. It's just gonna go flying onto the floor. But it's not like I damaged the eyeshadow. It's just, it flaked. The shimmer flaked a little bit. So yeah, this one is number 8. And I just know I can count on this palette every time I use it. I know some people say the Melt formula is a little bit hard to work with. It's not exactly a beginner-friendly formula. It's very pigmented. But I would say out of all of their palettes, I would suggest this one for someone who's first starting out with makeup. I think that this one blends out beautifully. And there's not too many like intimidating colors in here, that once you like lay down your base shades, then you can deepen up the look with the darker shades, and that's why it works a little bit better than I would say than their other palettes would be for someone who's first starting out with eyeshadow. Okay, so number 6 is my only Glam Light palette in this video, but this is such a stunning palette. So number 6 is the Glam Light Chocolate Donut palette. I don't really reach for this one as much as the other ones until really the winter time. And the reason why is because, I mean, this did come out in the winter time for like Christmas. There was a whole like chocolate factory, like Wonka vibes, collection that she was coming out with. And this was the eyeshadow palette that came out with it. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting for Glam Light to do a neutral palette. And when they did, I knew I was going to pick it up because I had tried the pizza palette and that was really it. So I was like holding out to see if they were going to come out with a neutral palette finally, and they did. And this is just such a beautiful palette. The shimmers in here are so beautiful and metallic. I love the more golden tone shimmers. You guys know, of course, I love the shade Sweet Tooth because it's a gorgeous gold. but it's kind of like a more unique gold, but there's so many like multi-dimensional glitters and Glamlite shimmers that they just make them so multi-dimensional and sparkly on the lid. But they're not like toppery shades, they're just straight up metallic, and they're so gorgeous. I love this white chocolate shade. This marble shade's a really beautiful cool toned shimmer. Chocolate Sprinkles is kind of like a more toppery shade, but it's more pigmented than the Nabla ones. And then Boston Cream is more of a cool tone shimmer. And then you have these really pretty neutral tone shimmers in here. This is probably the first palette that I'm talking about that doesn't have a brow bone highlight in it. But it's just the shimmers in here for me that makes this palette so special. And then the center shade, which is the highlighter, is so stunning, and I use it every single time I use this palette because it's such a stunning shimmer shade. And the mattes in here blend out beautifully as well. I think I'm going to swatch a couple of these just because I do want to swatch a couple of shades in this video. I'm not going to swatch everything. I just wanted to show you guys how metallic these shadows are, and that's why, oh god, they're so pretty. Glamlite just, it's not just their eyeshadows, it's everything in their brand. They're not just a gimmick. Their formula really is stunning. So that one is Sweet Tooth, this one is Sweet Filling, and this one is White Chocolate. Look at that white chocolate shade. That's what I'm talking about. They're so metallic and gorgeous. So yeah, if you've been eyeing Glamlite, I really think that this is a nice palette because it's, again, a nice beginner-friendly neutral palette. I don't find these shades are really that hard to work with whatsoever. They have a really beautiful formula for Glamlite. But also, I think that this palette is a little bit easier to store as opposed to some of their other palettes because they can have some really big, you know, bulky food packaging, and this one I do like. They kind of condensed it a little, and it's a lot easier to store for some people. For me, I display all of my Glamlite palettes. I have 4 because I love displaying them because their packaging is so freaking cute, and how could I not? It's just adorable. I love it. So that one is number 6. Okay, now let's get into the top. Wait, hold on. That one is number 7, right? 7. Okay, let's get into the rest of the palettes. So rounding out the bottom 5, which means nothing whatsoever because, again, they're not bottom palettes for me. I love them. But number 6 is definitely a palette that was the most surprising to me, that I ended up loving it so much. And this has become one of my favorite neutral palettes ever. And we're going to start talking about ColourPop. So number 6 is the ColourPop Plush Like Me palette. I cannot believe how much I actually ended up loving this palette, you guys. I had no intentions of picking this palette up myself. I got it for free with an order. And I decided to try it that way. And this has become one of my favorite palettes in my collection. I really love the depth and dimension that's in this palette. I like that it's a little bit more matte heavy, but it has the perfect amount of shimmers in here as well. And I would consider this a neutral palette, even though there are little pops of green in here. They're very neutral tone. They're more like olivey colors. And then you have like this warm tone row of such beautiful mattes and very deep, dark shades that you can use to deepen up the crease and the outer corners. And then you have these really beautiful neutral tone shades. And then I also love that you do get a brow bone highlight in here. And again, this one is a little bit darker than what I'm used to, but it's a very cool toned brow bone highlight, so it kind of makes it a little bit lighter on my brow bone. And it's just beautiful. Like, this is definitely a standalone palette for me. I don't have to reach into any other palette when I use this, because I find that I just have everything that I need in this palette right here. I love that this olive tone color goes with this more olive tone neutral, and then you can use like these deepening shades to add some depth and dimension. You have these red colors that go with this red, and then you have this rose gold and this really beautiful, you guys know I'm a sucker for these type of like champagne colored shimmers, and those pair beautifully with any of these matte shades. It's just, every time I use this palette, I really am shocked as to how much I really love it. It's definitely the most surprising neutral palette that I have on this list. And I love it. I think it's beautiful. This is like this is the metallics. Look how good those are. They're almost as shiny as the Glam Light ones. The Glam Light ones are definitely more sparkly, but these hold their own. So we have Throwback and we have Throwback and Video Night. Wait. Yeah, no, that's not right. TLC and Throwback. I'm sorry. So that's that more olivey green shimmer, and then that's that more rose gold one. And then I'll swatch some of the mattes, but the mattes in here are so good, you guys. Do you see how pigmented those are? And they're just so velvety smooth. I love this palette. I really do. It's like a grungy toned dream, but they're so pigmented and they're so easy to blend out, and they add so much depth and dimension, and the shimmers are just so metallic and wet looking on your lid. So this one is Flannel and this one is Velvet one. Just really stunning. I love it, and like I said, this is becoming one of my favorite palettes in my collection because I think that it has such a beautiful range of light to dark neutrals in here, and it's become one of my favorites. I'm honestly shocked. I really am, because I didn't think I would say that or even have this palette in my collection, and it somehow crept up my list of being one of my favorite neutral palettes. I love it so much. Okay, now let's get into the top 5. Again, of course, this was a palette I didn't think I was going to get, but number 5 is the ColourPop Lust for Dusk palette. You guys know how much love I have for this palette. I think this palette is wonderful. Literally the sky looks like it's about to pour outside. Like, it got really dark out, but it says there's no rain in the forecast. Let me just check really quick because it's kind of like bothering me. Doesn't say any rain. Okay, so number 5 is this guy right here, because I love the range that you get in this eyeshadow palette. You can do so many different looks with it. I know I've raved about this palette so much on my channel, so I'm not really gonna talk about it for too long. I just love the range of different looks you get in this palette. You get grays, you get oranges, you get pinks, you get neutral shades. There's so much variety in this palette, but I still feel like it is a neutral palette because they're like toned down looks, but they're still come off as a neutral vibe. The shimmers in here are so sparkly and beautiful, and the mattes are so pigmented and easy to work with. I've said this a million times. This is one of my all-time favorite ColourPop palettes for a reason. It's just friggin' wonderful, and this is one of the other 16 pan palettes that I was going to talk about. But the metallics in here are where it's at. They really are just so beautiful on the lids, and they just are so gorgeous every time I use them. The shade Shaken, like, are you kidding me with how pretty that is? And Mood Lighting, come on. And then this purple called Serve Chilled. Oh, they're just so pretty. You're not really going to get too much there, but I'm just swatching a couple of them for you. So that one is Shaken, which is that gorgeous sparkly. Oh my god, it sparkles so much. I love it. That one is Mood Lighting, and this one is Serve Chilled. Just gorgeous, 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 gorgeous. You guys know how much I love eyeshadow. And I'm actually wearing this palette in my Let's Talk About Cream Blushes video where I review all the cream blushes in my collection if you guys want to see a recent look that I did with it. And I absolutely love how that look turned out. So yeah, I don't want to talk about it too much. I just freaking love this palette. It's such a beautiful summer to fall palette because it has like those sunset type of colors in here and those shades that literally look like dusk in the sky, and I just friggin' love it. So this one is number 5. Okay, my top 4. So number 4 might not be everybody's neutral cup of tea, but it's definitely become one of my all-time favorite neutral palettes. And this is my favorite, like, really warm tone neutral palette in my collection. And I have to include a warm tone palette in here because you guys know those are my favorite shades to wear. So number 4 is the Beauty Bay Fiery 16 color palette. And this has a wide variety of different tones in here. It has neutral shades. It has some darker orangey tones. It has some red tones in here. But for me, I consider this palette mostly neutral for me. And you can pretty much, anything that's wearable looks for me, I would consider neutral. So this palette is just so phenomenal for the price. I think this and ColourPop are the best quality you're going to get at such an amazing price. I've said this a gajillion times, but I don't know how Beauty Bay makes their palettes so gorgeous for being so affordable. I think this palette was like $10 because I think I got it on a really good sale. And I would honestly pay $50 for this palette because I feel like that's, you're getting even better quality sometimes. I would compare this to just as good as Melt, is what I would say. The formula kind of reminds me a little bit of Melt, like in the Rust palette. They're kind of similar to me, but the reason why this one's ranked so much higher is because I do use this one a hell of a lot more. I don't just use it in the fall time, even though this is like a really like fall tone palette for me. I use this year round. I just used this last week for a look because you can go neutral tone, you can go more orangey tone, you can go more even grungy tone. You can use these reddish colors. And then the shimmers in here, you get such a gorgeous selection of beautiful shimmers, like to golds, to reddish tones, to darker, to lighter, and it's just a phenomenal palette. The mattes blend so easily. I never have any issues blending these shadows. They're just phenomenal. So I'm just going to swatch a couple of them for you guys. It's just so good. Those are some of the shimmers. Probably going to have to wipe my hand very soon. So this one is Tango, which is that really beautiful orangey tangerine shimmer. And this one is Ruby Slippers, which is a gorgeous shimmery red. And then I'm just going to swatch one of the matte shades. Look how pigmented that is. Like, are you kidding me? And that one is Hot Sauce. And they're so, that one's up here. They're just so buttery smooth. And I just, again, cannot get over how amazing the quality is for such an affordable palette. So I just love it, and I kind of want to try another Beauty Bay palette in the future. There are a couple of brands I might consider revisiting talking about these palettes in this video. I'm just going to wipe my hand so we can, and then we'll get into the top 3 picks. Okay guys, so now we're going to get into my top 3 favorite neutral palettes in my collection. I just love all 3 of these so much. And honestly, I would use all of these no matter what order they're in because I love them so much. And it was really hard to rank them, but I pretty much knew what my top 3 were going to be. But I love all of them so much. So number 3 is the BH Cosmetics Sweet Shop Sugar Cone Palette. Now this is my first and only BH Cosmetics palette in my collection. And a lot of people were raving about these ice cream palettes when they first came out. And for good reason. BH Cosmetics has a wonderful formula for, again, such a affordable price. Besides Beauty Bay and ColourPop, BH definitely makes the best affordable eyeshadow formula out there. Their eyeshadow palettes are phenomenal. And I just love this little 8-pan palette so much. I think that there is like really everything that I need in this palette. The only reason why this one's ranking a little bit lower is because the top two both have brow bone highlights in them. This shade is a little bit darker for me to use as a brow bone highlight. It is like a little bit more like darker than my skin tone, so I can't really use it as a brow bone highlight. But I like using it as a transition shade a lot, or I'll even use it to set my whole like eyelid before I go in with eyeshadow to set my primer. And then I really like these neutral tones. Like, honestly, I don't really get bored with these at all because they pair so beautifully with the shimmers in here. And this is a palette, even though there are, like, I use the same neutral mattes every single time because those are the only mattes that are in here. Oh my god, I just got eyeshadow on my forehead. I don't know how I just did that. So sometimes that can get a little bit boring for me, but with this one, it's just the shimmers are so stunning in here and the mattes perform so well that it doesn't really bother me. And plus, I don't use this palette as often as the top two that I'm going to talk about, that every time I use this palette, I look forward to using it and the look that I'm going to come out with because it's just so gorgeous. So I really love this palette. I forgot to grab another tissue. Give me a second. Okay, sorry. We're almost done, guys. I just wanted to swatch some of them, but these metallics are just so wet looking and stunning on the lid. I always use cookie dough on the inner corners because it's such a stunning inner corner highlight, but all over the lid, it's phenomenal. And these shimmers are just so wet and gorgeous looking, and the mattes are just so buttery and blend so smoothly every time. So they're just gorgeous eyeshadows, and they're just super soft and smooth. Oh, they're so beautiful. And then I'll just swatch one of the matte shades. They're so soft. So this one is cookie dough, this one is dipped, and this one is delicious. And they really are delicious, beautiful shimmers and mattes, and I love it. I know some people had a bit of criticism about some of the palettes. Some people said that this one was boring, but for me, I love it. I really do, because I love the formula so much. So that one is number 3. I believe you could still get these on BH's website, but if you can't, I think that BH is going to be coming out with some other products in the future. I think they just came out with some travel palettes. I'm not really sure. I saw a video of somebody covering that. I just haven't watched it yet, but they are coming back with some eyeshadow palettes. Okay, number 2. I really cannot believe how long I lived without this palette in my collection, because honestly, I really could not picture it without. I really couldn't picture myself without this palette at this point. So number 2 has slowly crept up my list. I mean, actually it crept up my list pretty fast. And number 2 is the Sigma Ambiance eyeshadow palette. I really cannot believe how long it took me to get this palette and get on the Sigma train, because they honestly have a brilliant eyeshadow formula. I really cannot believe how impressed I was with the quality of this palette, and it's just so beautiful, you guys. I love the shimmers in here. You just get the perfect amount of neutrals and shimmers in here. I never feel too overwhelmed to create a look with this palette. I know some people also said about this palette the same thing that they said about the BH, is that the looks look a little repetitive and too similar, but for me, I don't care, because the formula is just so gorgeous to me. I love, love, love the shimmers in here, and the mattes are just so buttery smooth and easily blendable, and I just know every single time I use this palette, I can count on it to be just such a gorgeous neutral palette, and that's why I just love it so much. So I'm just going to swatch a couple of the shimmers for you guys. They're just so gorgeous. And they're so smooth and wet looking and beautiful on the eyes, and the mattes are just as good and blendable. So that one is Sunflower. This one is which one is that? Candlelight. And then this one is Marigold. Marigold is such a gorgeous sparkly shimmer. And then the middle shade is a really beautiful, like, sparkly shimmer as well. They're all just amazing. The only reason why that this palette is not number one is because the brow bone highlight is a little bit dark for me. I still use it and I can get away with it. But if it was just a little bit lighter toned, for me, this would be number one, the most perfect neutral palette for me. I'm just going to swatch a couple of the mattes, which are also just as good as the shimmers. Was it this one that I just swatched? I think it was. You're not going to see it too much in the swatches, but they're so soft and buttery in person. So this one is Basque and this one is Summer Solstice. Oh, they're so beautiful. So yeah, I love this palette. There's nothing else I can say about it. I just cannot believe how blown away by the quality I was with this palette, and I love it so, so much. So yeah, this one is number 2. All right, and then that just leaves us with my number 1 neutral palette. I think you guys are going to guess which one this is. There's just nothing that can top it for me. I just think that this is the most perfect neutral palette. I think that this is like ColourPop's perfect neutral palette. And number 1, of course, is the ColourPop Going Coconuts palette. I just love this palette so much. It's just the most perfectly curated neutral palette for me. And it's only this tiny little 9 pan. And I just think that they created the perfect cool toned neutral, but also a little bit warm tone 9 pan palette. I love that there's 6 mattes in here. I was about to say 9 mattes and 3 gorgeous shimmer shades. These are some of the most metallic shimmers that ColourPop has ever done. I love the center shade. It's such a gorgeous sparkly shimmer, and then there's this more cool tone chocolatey shade, and then the palm reader shade is this stunning, like, super sparkly white shade. And the reason why this one is higher than the Sigma palette is because this shredded shade is like such a gorgeous neutral brow bone highlight for me. It's a little bit darker than a typical color I would go for, like a really matte white, but it works for me. It's not too dark underneath the brow bone at all for me. And then there's more of these like cool tone mattes. This nutty shade is such a gorgeous shade to deepen up anything, but you can also deepen up with this shade Get Crackin', or you can go more warm tone with these. This one's a little bit more warm toned as well, but then you also have these 2 cool toned mattes, and it's just beautiful. I love it so much. I don't have to think about my look when I use this. It's just boom, 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 and I'm done. And it's just such an easy, gorgeous palette to use. And that's why it's going to be my number 1. I'm sorry to disappoint people, but I really do love this palette. I feel like this is when ColourPop really actually cared about the color stories and the quality of their products. Now, I feel like this year they have not really been my favorite. I really don't think they're releasing that great of like collections, but I feel like with this collection, this was a really stunning neutral collection. It came out like 2 years ago at this point, but they still have it available. So this one is Shelia, or I think that's Lovely Bunch. Then we have Cocoa Crush and Decoco. Really beautiful. I just love this palette so much, you guys, and that's why it's always going to be my number 1. So yeah, sorry to disappoint anyone, but this is my collection. I don't know what I'm apologizing for. I'm going to tell you guys what my favorite neutral palette is, and I love it so much. So yeah, that is it, you guys. That is my top 10. Those are my top 10 favorite neutral palettes in my whole eyeshadow palette collection. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know what your favorite neutral palette is. I really would love to know. I'm always super curious. And let me know if you guys have tried any of these palettes and what your thoughts are. please leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. So yeah, I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Follow me on my Instagram at CBW819 and check out my Poshmark at the same handle. I love you guys so much. Bye.